Welcome to The Explainer. I'm so thrilled you're joining us today. We're jumping right into a totally unique story. It's a journey about art, pure, relentless determination, and a level of global cultural influence that, honestly, very few creators ever even come close to achieving.
Okay, so let's start with a really staggering number 250 million. That is the total number of manga copies circulating worldwide for the series we're exploring today. To wrap your head around that massive scale, consider this. While over half of those books are heavily concentrated right there in Japan, the rest have steadily spread across 46 other countries and regions. It's an absolute game changer in the publishing world, literally transforming a localized comic into this globally recognized absolute juggernaut of a literary property.
Which, of course, brings us to the core question of our explainer today. How in the world did an orphaned ninja from a hidden village become arguably one of the greatest cultural exports in Japanese history? It's such a fascinating hook, you know? Primarily because the journey of this incredibly famous character deeply mirrors the very personal, and honestly often frustrating, struggles of his own creator.
All right, Section 1, the making of a mangaka. You know, every global phenomenon has to start somewhere, right? And for this story, our starting line is Okayama Prefecture in Japan. The creator, Masashi Kishimoto, was, by his own admission, a kind of annoying kid. But he had this incredible, almost obsessive focus. He'd literally just stare at bugs or rivers for hours, absorbing all these tiny environmental details. He would even hide out during games of hide and seek just so he could sit in the dirt and draw characters from shows like Doraemon. Academically, though, not so great. He actually graduated second from the bottom of his high school class. But his big turning point didn't happen in a classroom anyway. It happened when he stood completely mesmerized for an hour, just staring at a promotional poster for the anime film Akira. The difficult, dynamic composition of that art, it completely relit his passion for manga, and he decided right then to dedicate his life to the craft. And man, after years of facing rejection and getting some really unsupportive feedback from his own family about his career choice, that intense determination finally paid off. In 1995, his submission won the prestigious Hop Step Award for Amateur Manga Artists, which gave him that absolutely crucial industry foothold he needed. Moving on to Section 2, enter the ninja, Naruto.
So, by 1999, Kishimoto had really refined his ideas and launched his weekly serialization. The core of the story was an alienated, struggling orphan named Naruto Uzumaki, a kid whose ultimate dream was to be Hokage, the village leader. It's pretty easy to see how Kishimoto's own underdog journey directly mirrored his creation here. But if we want to understand why this specific story caught fire all over the globe, we have to take a look at the medium itself. See, while Western comics historically leaned heavily into pacing driven by continuous action, Japanese manga tends to place a much heavier emphasis on characterization, internal monologues, and mood. And Kishimoto, he utilized this beautifully. He used the quiet, negative space in his comic panels to explore some really heavy themes: profound isolation, childhood trauma, and just this desperate need for societal validation. This foundational approach to pacing paved the way for the series' emotional core to really thrive. It allowed readers to connect intimately with these characters way before a single punch was ever thrown. And that emphasis on characterization absolutely shines the brightest in the team dynamic. Kishimoto didn't just write a lone wolf hero. He built this entire ecosystem of highly flawed, interdependent personalities. By grouping our brash, untalented protagonist with a natural-born prodigy, an incredibly analytical peer, and a deeply experienced but kind of detached mentor, he set up this infinitely rich narrative engine. This specific structural choice highlighted their specialized skills and, at the same time, totally exposed their complementary weaknesses. It meant the narrative could seamlessly shift from high-octane martial arts strategy right into deeply endearing, emotional insights about rivalry, jealousy, and mutual respect. So it wasn't just a story about getting physically stronger. It was this fascinating exploration of how contrasting personalities can either clash or completely elevate one another under immense pressure. Expanding on that incredible world-building, Kishimoto introduced a highly structured magic system that ended up being a brilliant export. Instead of just relying on some vague mysticism, he gave us jutsu, providing a tangible, almost pseudo-scientific framework for the action. The highly visual nature of it, combining very specific hand seals to manipulate distinct genetic traits or elemental chakra natures, created a super marketable,
easily recognizable system. It wasn't just entertaining to watch, you guys, it was interactive. It actually allowed the growing international fandom to categorize, debate, and totally analyze the mechanics of the world. And that level of meticulous design? It turned passive viewers into active community participants, cementing a really deep, long-lasting investment in the lore.
Now, let's jump into Section 3, Building a Multimedia Empire. Okay, we are now shifting gears from a deeply personal story drawn by a young guy in his room into the mechanics of a massive global enterprise. I mean, just look at this. The sheer volume of output generated by this franchise is staggering when you lay it all out. A serialized narrative running for 72 volumes, that is a monumental task of endurance for any author. But then translating that into a continuously broadcasting anime spanning 720 total episodes, that required a colossal industrial effort from animation studios, voice actors, and directors. Add 11 theatrical movies and a video game arm that moved tens of millions of units to the mix, and you really start to understand the sheer economic weight of this property. It is just fascinating to contrast these vast, multi-million-dollar figures with those humble beginnings in Okayama we were talking about earlier. But of course, sustaining that insane level of production comes with some totally unique logistical challenges. Specifically, the creation of original anime content, which fans widely know as filler. If we look specifically at the Shippuden era of the anime, over 40% of the broadcast consisted of completely original stories that the animation studio literally had to invent. And the reason for this was purely practical. The television show was simply moving way faster than Kishimoto could write and draw the weekly comic. Now, while fans heavily debated how this non-canon material impacted the pacing, from a purely economic standpoint, it was an absolute necessity. Producing this high volume of content kept the series continuously on global television screens for years without a single interruption. It held down those crucial broadcast time slots, kept the brand in the public consciousness week after week, and essentially acted as a relentless long-term marketing engine. Let's move on to Section 4, Japan's soft power export. So we're shifting our focus now to explore exactly how this inherently Japanese narrative managed to completely captivate the West, acting as an incredibly effective engine of cultural soft power. Researcher Amy Plum notes Kishimoto's brilliant use of traditional Japanese mythology to add these really deep thematic layers to his world. Instead of just creating your run-of-the-mill generic fantasy powers, he tied the abilities of his major characters directly to ancient folklore. Some of the most powerful techniques in the show were named straight after major Shinto deities, like the sun goddess Amaterasu or the storm god Susanoo. He even seamlessly integrated the trickster kitsune, or fox spirit, a total staple of Japanese legends, right into the core protagonist's origin story. Essentially, Kishimoto packaged hundreds of years of traditional folklore into this highly accessible, modernized format for readers all over the world who had absolutely no prior exposure to Japanese history. And a prime example of this cultural integration is the recurring motif of the Uchiwa fan. Now, within the universe of the story, it just serves as a simple crest for a prominent clan. But in actual real-world Japanese myths, these specific fans are traditional tools used to literally exorcise evil spirits by blowing them away. And then, much later in the narrative, the character wielding this crest literally gains the ability to blow away the evil influence of the fox spirit. This is where Kishimoto's genius in export truly lies. These deeply specific cultural motifs were intricately woven into the plot, and he entirely trusted the international audience to decode them. There were no heavy-handed explanations, no tedious footnotes dragging you down. By fostering this genuine sense of discovery, he made the international fandom feel respected and got them deeply invested in uncovering the lore all by themselves. And as researcher Christopher A. Bourne points out, the storyline inherently contains traditional Confucian values, deeply emphasizing concepts like hard work, sincerity, and communal duty. This is actually a fascinating contrast to your typical Western heroic ideal, which, let's be honest, often heavily prioritizes individualism and the idea of solitary triumph. But by blending those specific Japanese mythological elements with these broader Eastern philosophies, Kishimoto created a totally unique hybrid hero. The narrative really resonated globally because it offered a fresh, new philosophical perspective on those familiar, universal themes we all know: friendship, cooperation, and the morality of conflict. Readers around the world were essentially engaging with highly complex cultural and philosophical concepts, but doing it through the super entertaining, highly accessible lens of a ninja adventure. All right, bringing it all home with Section 5, an unending global legacy. So bringing our analysis to the present day, the overarching success of this 15-year serialization demonstrates a pretty remarkable leap from a niche comic to a massive mainstream cultural fixture.
I mean, earning accolades like the 2006 Quill Award for Best Graphic Novel and routinely dominating the New York Times bestseller list, that proved this wasn't just some fleeting trend. The property established a massive, officially licensed footprint in 90 different countries, and on top of that, the development of a live-action Hollywood adaptation by Lionsgate with a major director attached really highlights the final phase of this journey, full-blown mainstream Western cinema validation. When you put them all together, these milestones form a narrative of a franchise that steadily and consistently broke down international borders, proving for sure that global audiences are eager for stories that challenge their typical cultural paradigms.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. The timeline of this universe is currently continuing through a sequel series centered entirely on the next generation. It really forces us to ask, will this new era of characters be able to wield that exact same level of global soft power and cultural influence as the generation that started it all? The media landscape today is vastly different, obviously, but the enduring legacy and the foundational impact of that original series remain completely cemented in global pop culture history. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive on The Explainer today, and as always,